Welcome to Greiner Hard Talks. Once again, I want to talk about how to build sustainable businesses. Once again, I want to talk about transformation and I want to talk about change. My name is Stefan, and when I'm not interviewing people, I'm actually helping all our divisions in becoming more sustainable. So, how to build a better future? That's the question for today, and that's a question that I would like to discuss with my today's guest, Manfred Stanek, the CEO of Greiner Packaging.
Pleased to be here. Hello, Stefan.
Hello, Manfred. The first question for a packaging CEO would usually be to talk about plastics and if plastics can be sustainable. And we're going to do that later, of course. But before we start today, we all know you as the CEO of the company. You've been with Greiner Packaging for about 4.5 years now.
Exactly, yeah.
And before we jump into the topic of sustainability, I want to get to know you as a person.
Sure.
Yeah? So, I have brought a couple of questions and I would like to answer, I would like you to finish those sentences. First sentence is, I'm passionate about.
I'm passionate about life, about independence, about the things we do, about my family, about nature. Those are the things that drive me, I think. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Second sentence, the one bad habit I wish I could give up.
Not to overthink things.
All right. Question number 3, or sentence number 3. If I had one superpower, that would be?
I'd like to be invisible.
Why that?
Well, you can go anywhere, no one sees you, you can check anything out, you know, you could go to Fort Knox, you know.
Sure, I'd like that, yeah. Another one. What fascinates me most in life is?
I think the cycle of life, you know, how things turn in cycles, and the cycle of nature and the cycles of our lives as humans. I think that's fascinating.
And I guess life cycles is something that we're going to talk about later as well. Next sentence. If I had a chance to meet one famous person, that would be?
I think it was Julius Caesar.
All right, why that?
Yeah.
What is so fascinating?
Well, I think the whole Roman culture is fascinating. You know, their life was so similar to ours, but still 2,000 years ago. And I just think that's really cool. I really like the Romans, and I think Caesar made a huge impact on the period where he lived. I think he must have been a pretty cool guy.
Last sentence. One thing I wish I would have known 20 years ago.
I wish I would have known 20 years ago.
Is there something where you felt like, okay, if I had known this like a while ago, things would have turned out differently?
Well, I think the obvious question is, you know, how quick time passes. You know, I'm a little bit above 50 now, and, you know, time flies, and sometimes you look back and you say to yourself, well, you should have maybe been more courageous, you know, and in some points in your life, because in the long run, as Kane said, we're all dead, you know, so it doesn't make a difference if you're more or less courageous, so you can very much go for everything that you want to achieve.
Good, then let's not waste any more time and let's jump into the topic of sustainability. Now, I have made it very easy for myself. I've looked up numbers, and you can't beat numbers, I guess. And looking at the footprint, the impact of businesses. Yeah? There's obviously negative impacts, there's positive impacts. Now, I want to look at our negative impacts. And if we also look at numbers, we can see there is 200,000 tons of materials that we use every year. There is more than 120,000 tons of emissions, there's water, there's waste. Yeah? So our footprint is obviously massive. Yeah? And what we do right now is obviously also not sustainable. So tell me, like, what do you think? What are the ways out of the business we do it today in also looking at reducing our footprint?
Well, it's a very broad question, I say. You know, first of all, I think as an industry, we need to make, as an industrial player, we need to make sure that we produce as efficient as we can. So while we make our products, which have a purpose in life, we do not waste any more resources than we need to make those products. I think that's the number one thing as an industrial player, just not to waste resources. And I think the second thing is to continuously rethink how we produce those products and provide those services, to think about new technological innovations and see how we can do things differently, to use less resources or to use no resources at all. Yeah, so I think technology plays a big role here, and we always need to think how we can innovate to use less, to make the same, or even to make more.
So the goal would be to get the resources down, to reduce that while actually doing
or to
more
eliminate them. You could bring them down, or you could even eliminate, and you could make something without the resource that you originally used, and you find a technological way not to use this resource anymore at all.
But how would that work? How would you make something without using something?
Well, for example, you can have a certain product which has 3 components, and you can say, okay, but for the functionality of those products, you actually don't need 3 components, you only need 2 components. Yeah?
Okay,
and then you lose less resources in order to have the same functionality. Yeah.
Okay, so it's less resources, less materials.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Good. Well, then let's look into the materials that we use. They are mostly virgin materials, yeah, and we have targets to look into more secondary recycled content. Why are we struggling to use more secondary raw materials?
Well, I think one of the reasons is that the linear model that we have is extremely efficient. Yeah. It starts with raw materials that are relatively cheap, and I'm talking mainly about oil now.
Yeah.
So we have a value chain which is extremely efficient, and when you want to do something different in the beginning, it is likely that what you do is less efficient than what you're doing right now. Yeah. And I think this is one of the struggles. How can we do something better, but at the same time, at least in the beginning, it's going to be less efficient than what we do today. Yeah, this is, I think, something we are struggling with. Yeah, because when you look at our product, you find it on every shelves in a supermarket in the world at a very good price, at a very high conveniency. Yeah. So the question is, but again, it's not a sustainable model today. It's a linear model. So the question is, how can we beat this very efficient linear model with an even more sufficient circular model?
So how do we do that? That's the question then.
Well,
how do we change that?
I think it's about innovation. It's about the innovation around the entire value chain here. Mm-hmm. Yeah? Because if the new circular model needs to become much more efficient and with a much better technology, and this only can come through technological innovation on the one hand, and also different behaviors on the consumer side on the other hand. Yeah.
And technological innovations when it comes to materials or machinery?
It comes to process materials, machinery. I think it's around everything. It's around the material science behind it, and it's around the process technology, how to convert those materials into the products that we want to have. Yeah.
You mentioned already a linear economy is the economy that we see, and that's not even true or only true for the plastics industry. You see that for fashion, electronics, for plenty of industries.
That's correct.
Yeah. So, and we all know there's an agreement that a circular business model is the way forward, something that is more sustainable. So, how does a circular model look like for us as a company? What's the future picture that we're going to see, and how is that going to look like?
Yeah, I mean, the vision that we have as a company is that you mentioned at the beginning we use 200,000 tons of raw materials. Yeah, that all of those 200,000 tons of raw materials come back from resources that we had already used before through recycling, through reuse, through different models, but not use any of those 200,000 tons of virgin materials that we dig out or that we explore from natural resources or whatsoever. Yeah, so those would be the vision, that everything of this comes into the value chain as already something that had been used before.
So it's about creating loops in the end.
Absolutely, yeah.
So now what are our options to actually promote that loop or to encourage that a linear line becomes a circle? What can we do? What are 3 things as a company, as a packaging manufacturer?
Well, I think if you say 3 things, first of all, I think we need to come to the understanding that we are part of a value chain and our responsibility goes beyond our part in the value chain. So when we do some things, we also need to think 2 steps ahead or even 2 steps behind. Yeah? We didn't do that in the past. In the past, we as a plastic packaging company, we produced plastic packaging products and that's what we thought about. But today we need to think, okay, where do these products go from here and how do they come back then to our suppliers? I think this is one thing. And the second thing, we understand our material. You know, we work with plastic, we work with paper. There is no one who understands our material better than we do. Definitely not the consumer, not our customers, not our suppliers. There's no one who does that better than we do. And this brings a responsibility, yeah, that we innovate our own processes and materials so that they can fit in better than they did in the past into the entire value chain to make that loop happen that you had mentioned before.
You were already saying materials. We are material experts when it comes to plastics. Now the problem is there's a lot of people that say like, "Igitt, well, plastics, there's no positive connotation with that material anymore because people now can see the negative impacts of that material." Did you ever think about like saying, okay, we stop doing plastic, let's do paper? You come from the aluminum industry, so you obviously have an experience with a different material. Did you ever think or get up in the morning saying like, let's do something else, it's not the right thing to do?
No, I don't, because that would just feel to me like running away from a challenge that we are facing. You know? And I could do that, but the challenge would still be there for society. So I think it's much better that we use our know-how and competence to face the challenge rather than run away from it.
But for other materials, we already have loops. If you think about aluminum and paper, there's perfectly running loops, and for plastics, there's not.
Yes, I'm not sure if I would agree with that. They are perfectly running loops. It is correct, you know, the recycling loop in, for example, aluminum or metal works much better than in plastics. But it's also true that you use an enormous amount of energy, to produce, for example, aluminum in the first place, And with paper, you have other issues with forestry, etc. So I think every material has its own challenge, and we need to face this challenge from every one of those single materials if we want to make a difference. But running away from one material to another material is not going to solve any problems.
Then looking into the options we have, into solutions, you said like we need to check what's happening behind us and what's happening in front of us. So there was colleagues saying like, why don't we buy a recycling company? There's obviously plenty of plastics waste. We recycle ourselves, produce the material, and then create that loop ourselves instead of relying on value chain partners that are obviously a little slow.
Yeah, and we are actually looking into that, and I think this is part of the answer, but I don't think it's the entire answer, because raw material streams in the future will have to come from different sources. Some of those sources are mechanical recycling, some of those sources are chemical recycling, some of those sources may be bio-based materials from renewable resources. So I think there's more than one answer, and we need to explore all those answers.
But that means, translating what you just said, is like in the future we're still going to do packaging, but there might be more. We might also look into doing recycling ourselves.
Exactly, yes, exactly,
okay.
Absolutely.
So like we have broadened the scope of our business in a way.
Exactly, because we need to broaden our view on the value chain as I mentioned before,
Another topic when it comes to packaging is I keep reading about retailers and fast-moving consumer good companies looking into different business models, and that's obviously also part of the discussion that we need to have, because today we produce single-use products. The question is like, can that also be different? Can there be different business models for plastics? Now there's companies that start refill and reuse models. What do you feel when you read those news that people get away from single-use packaging that is obviously good for a company because you sell more often?
Well, first of all, I think those are cool concepts.
Yeah.
The question for me is for which type of products do you use which concept? Let's take a refill concept. So I have, I don't know, a coffee cup which I keep to myself and I keep refilling it when I go to the coffee shop, to a Starbucks, etc. Yeah, that might work for coffee, and it might work well for coffee. That doesn't mean it works well for all the products that we produce. You know, when I go to a butcher and buy a piece of meat, then I probably will think about the packaging of this product differently than for a coffee. So I don't think there's one solution fits all. The consumer just needs to be conscious what is the best solution for the product that he's using, I guess.
But are you nervous, or do you see a threat and a trend that goes away from single use? Because we do a lot of single use, and that gives obviously good profits. And if customers or retailers and others buy less products, that obviously impacts our revenues, isn't it?
I don't see it that way, because at the end of the day, if you look at it, what we do, we package food products. Yeah. So people are still going to eat in the future. Yeah, and the way we live, the world is feeding billions of people. The way we live, we need to package those products so that we don't throw them away. Yeah, so the solution that the customer is looking for does not change, I think, but the way how we satisfy the solution is changing. So I don't see it as a threat, but we need to be agile and flexible to change the way how we provide the solution to the customer. Yeah, and if this does not mean using a single-use plastic cup, yeah, it can then mean using a refill cup. It can also mean that we use a cup that already was in the cycle before through the recycling cycle, and therefore is not a single-use plastic cup. Yeah, so I think there are many ways to still remain in business and satisfy the need of the customer. What we do not want to do, you know, is take the same cup that is made out of oil, use it for 5 minutes, and then throw it away, and then it gets burned, and all the CO2 that is captured in the cup is out in the environment. Yeah, this is something that we clearly don't want.
But that is something that is happening right now.
Exactly, and this is something that needs to change. But I don't see this as a threat for us. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So let's jump into a different area, because sustainability is obviously broad, and what I want to do now is to talk about the topic of diversity, yeah? Because there's clear evidence that more diverse companies perform better, yeah? Now, looking at us, there's no surprise at Greiner, there's a bit of a diversity challenge, yeah? If you look at our board, if you look at senior executives, it's mainly male-dominated, yeah? And if we look at Greiner Packaging, we can see 22 production sites around the world, and there's one female general manager. How do you explain that to your two daughters?
Yeah, well, first of all, we have more than one female general manager, so that's cool. Yeah, but we still do not
How many do we have?
Enough. Well, I can think of at least 2. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's still not enough, and I think, I mean, when you look at the, but let's stay with the gender diversity. Yeah. I mean, I've been now working in the industry for more than 20 years, and that's unfortunately the way we all have been brought up, and this is something that we need to change. Yeah? You know, I worked in my career with very many female executives, and it is a shame, I think, that we in our company don't have more women in leadership. Yeah? Now, do we have a golden bullet to solve this? I cannot think of one. You know, I think there are a number of good ideas in the market and in our company how this can be solved. The only thing I think is we are working proactively on this as a society and as a company. And you mentioned, you know, I'm a father of 2 daughters. You know, I'm 100% convinced that my daughters need to have and will have the same opportunities as men. But when I listen to my 19-year-old daughter, this is not the feedback that she gives me, you know, about how she sees her place in society today. Yeah. So there's definitely things that we need to change.
I would agree that there's no silver bullet. Still, share with me, like, I mean, now you're the CEO and you're obviously an influential person, to put it nicely. So you can change things. Like, what are we doing as a company to promote female leadership, to promote women in general?
Well, first of all, we give everyone the same opportunity. You know, that sounds like something which is obvious, but we all know this is not obvious in the industry. So whenever we talk about career management, about talent management, we want to make sure that we also think about diversity when we think about things like talent management and recruiting policy and which people we want to bring into this company. So I would hope that that diversity is part of our thought process when we think about leadership, when we think about recruiting, when we think about succession planning, when we think about all those things.
Another conflict could be that you have a man and a woman equally qualified. Why don't we commit ourselves to say, like, if both are equally qualified, we promote and support the woman instead of the man?
Well, but would this be fair to the men?
Was it fair in the past to the women, the system?
Yeah, but to be unfair in a certain moment, does it help you to recite history?
No, obviously not. But I mean, since they're both equally qualified, why not saying, okay, we have a gap and we respond to the gap?
I think this is certainly something that when we make this decision, we would consider making it as a rule. I'm not sure if I would feel comfortable because it sounds unfair then to the male candidate.
Good. I think we can agree here that this needs to be addressed, and this is going to be a very important topic, as I said. Now, moving on, I would quickly like to talk about sustainability from a cost angle. Yeah, because sometimes still I find people are saying like, oh, sustainability, that's costly, that will cost money. Yeah, so let's not do it. Yeah, they see it as a barrier to become more sustainable. How do we deal with that? Like, how do you manage that? If, let's take the case, yeah, waste, there's a service provider that incinerates waste and the other one recycles, but obviously the one where you put more effort in the recycling is a little bit more expensive.
It's a good point, and I don't think there's one single answer, but let me put out some things that come to my mind. First of all new things in general are more expensive than the things that have been there before because they are not here in scale, and if they're not here in scale means usually that there is a higher cost. But obviously through innovation and through technology innovation, we in the industry manage to drive the cost down. So just because something is more costly today does not mean that it will be more costly in the future, and this is not an argument for me to say, well, throw this out, this costs more money. You know, we need to work, as an industry, as we have done forever, to make those new things, to bring the cost down so that we are able to use those things. Yeah, I mean, this is one thing. Another thing, that is right now with the whole carbon pricing discussed very proactively are also the raw materials that we are using today maybe just priced too low. Yeah, we all know here in Austria, airplanes, fly with gasoline, which is not taxed appropriately, so they don't pay for the environmental damages or impacts they make. So we also need to look at the pricing of some raw materials we need in comparison to others, and this is again where politics comes in, as I said in the beginning. Yeah. Those would be some of my views on that. Mm-hmm.
Great. I want to mention another topic. We have, over the last 1 or 2 years, increased our engagement with external stakeholders. Yeah, we become a member of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We recently joined the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. We've started supporting plastic banks because we see we need to collaborate along the value chain. Mm-hmm. I think that's one learning. And the other one is also we need to prove our responsibility and our engagement. Mm-hmm. Now, I want to talk quickly about the Alliance to End Plastic Waste because you sit on a board there, and that is a new partnership. Mm-hmm. So tell me, what is the Alliance all about, and why did we engage there?
Well, it's funny because yesterday we had a board meeting on the Alliance and Plastic Waste. What it is about, the name says it, to end plastic waste. Yeah, and what I find very thrilling about this alliance is the local projects they do in different cities and in different countries with concrete measures, on the shop floor, how we would say in the industry, to make an impact in local societies and local communities. I think this is a really cool approach. And we as an industry can help. We can help with our know-how, we can help with our resources, and this is what we want to do. We don't want to do it so much to prove it to ourselves. I think we want to do it because we think it's the right way to do. But I also think it's a two-way street. Those organizations and NGOs, they benefit from our resources and from our competence, but we also benefit from the things they try and the feedback they bring us from where they work. So I think this is a two-way street, and we can only learn if we work with partners like that.
Great. We are almost at the end, Manfred. I brought a couple of words, and I would like you to respond with whatever comes to your mind. Mm-hmm. Yeah. First buzzword is airport.
Stress.
Friday.
No stress.
Single use.
Single-use plastics.
Books.
Many of them.
The last one you enjoyed?
I'm just reading Bill Gates, How to Achieve Climate Neutrality.
So what is he saying? What is his main thesis? How do we tackle climate change?
Well, I'm not through the book yet, but I'm just stuck at a chapter which I'm really struggling with, where he talks about atomic power, from atomic power plants, because he argues that that's energy, with zero emissions, if you take away the construction of the power plant. So I don't have an answer yet, but I'm still struggling with the chapter. But when we do again our talk, maybe I can tell you what I think about it. Yeah, I'm interested in your thought about this.
Well, today it's about you, not about me, and we are going into the next buzzword. Sherlock Holmes.
Mystery.
Aluminium.
Something that is very, very heavy on energy use.
One last question. If you had one message to the world, or make it the Greiner world, what would that message be?
I want to focus my message on sustainability. Yeah. Sometimes we discuss, how can we do things and what is the right thing to do and how quickly we should do things and should we do things at all when it comes to sustainability, and we talk about costs, etc. And it sounds like a cliche, but sometimes I ask myself, which targets would our children give us? Yeah. And with this vision, I think it's sometimes easier to find an answer.
Manfred, thanks for being with me here today. I very much enjoyed it.
Thank you very much, Stefan.
I hope you also enjoyed this today. There will be more interviews the next coming weeks and months, so stay tuned, stay healthy, and stay happy. Thanks for being with us today.